Hello, BookTube. It's been a little while, but I'd like to make a video on the books that I hope to read, or at least the books that are on my mind to read, or the ones that interest me the most, um, to read this year uh, until before 2024. And I have a couple of stacks of books here, and I'd like to go through them with you and just show you the books that interest me right now and which ones that um, I for sure see myself reading before the end of the year and which ones are um, maybe not so concrete. Mostly because my philosophy of reading has changed a little bit. I used to be really detailed in having lists of, this is all I want to read, and I have to get these core books done. Um, and then I would strictly hold to that, and I did that just last year too. But this year I'm wanting to add a little bit more flavor and whimsical variety into my reading. So I still have a little bit of I still have like TBR and a list of books that I have, but I'm leaving it open, more open, so that if there's something on my shelf, anything on my shelf that just I have a desire to read, I can just pick it up and read it when I choose to. And I think part of that is liberating, part of it is restricting because I can be really indecisive when choosing my next read if I have too loose of a if I have too loose of freedom. So having that structure there really does help me concentrate on what I'm reading and then just keep on going next and next. But because the next book and whatnot. But anyways, I'll start off with the book that I'm currently reading right now. It's a buddy read. It's Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I love this edition. This is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. It's got a great feel to it, and it's got a great cover, and it's got an even better back cover. And I'm a fan of these Penguin Classic Deluxe Editions. Not so much of deckled edges, but I love the French flaps with the images and whatnot to them. As you can see, I'm not quite halfway through. I'm about almost over 250 pages in. Right now, it's really confusing me. It's difficult, but yet not difficult in the sense that I'm following what's going on and I have a good sense of what he's trying to get at, but I don't understand it, like, or why or how this the themes that he's drawing upon really fit in with his story, and the amount of chapters too can be a little off-putting because the chapters can be at most 6 to 8 pages, and they can be really short too, like 1 to 2 pages, and they're like little pieces within a story, so it's so fragmented. Sorry if you can hear that, but that's just how it is. It's summer, it's warm weather, so people are revving their engines. But anyways, so that's what I'm currently reading right now. And going on to what I currently hope to read as soon as I'm done Moby Dick. This will harken back to, I don't know if you've watched the other videos on my channel, but I'm going through very slowly going through a Western canon reading list that I made for myself. It'll be probably a year and a half ago that I made this, and I'm still within the ancient Greek realm, which is a little disappointing. I was hoping I'd be a lot further along now, but because of all the other reading demands and whatever, just daily life, it's a little bit more difficult to concentrate down, and sometimes I need books that I'm not studying. So, and these I hope to study in sometimes. But anyways, the next book, immediately after Moby Dick, I hope to read is The Greek Sophists. This is, the Sophists were a philosophy and rhetoric group in ancient Greece, around, the 400s BC, and they're different from the pre-Socratics, which I've just read. Was it a few weeks ago, I read the pre-Socratics, which was really rewarding, even though it was difficult. and the volume I had, I don't have it within reach, but it was the Oxford Word Classics edition, and they only had 100 pages. It has 200 pages of the Pre-Socratics, which I read, and then I stopped, and they have another 100 pages of the Sophists, but I wanted more than 100 pages of the Sophists, and so I got this volume, which is around 300 and some pages of the fragments and commentary on what we do have of the Greek Sophists, because we don't have any of their full works, and Sophists are different from the Pre-Socratics in that the Pre-Socratics were more natural scientists, or natural philosophers is what they were called. They're not scientists in the term that we would call scientists, but they were the first ones to posit naturalistic explanations for the universe and try to understand the world in unifying terms, or in understandable terms that didn't point to the gods as explanations. And the Sophists are different in that they're more practical, from my understanding, since I haven't read these, but they're more practical in that they were teachers, itinerants, who went around educating wealthy young men, or wealthy families, the children of wealthy families, or the men of wealthy families in that time, how to speak well in centered around democratic Athens at the time, how to speak well, be a good orator, how to use rhetoric and whatnot. That's my understanding of what I have read on the Pre-Socratics. I haven't, but we'll see when I get to this. This is taking a little bit longer than I hoped to, but anyways, right after that, I hope to read, and this one I've been looking forward to for so long, The Histories by Herodotus. I've been looking forward to this one for so long. This one, I have this, the Pre-Socratics, before the Herodotus on the list, and they're enjoyable, but they're like a mountain to climb before I feel comfortable in tackling Herodotus, because Herodotus does actually mention the Pre-Socratics and some, I don't know if any Sophists, but some of the testimony that we know from them comes from Herodotus talking about them, and so they have to go linear if I'm going to read linear, right? And that's what I hope to get to with this nice big fat chunker of Greek history, and I've heard he's very enjoyable to read, and I really hope that's the case. This is a much newer translation from 1998, and I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm also looking forward to who comes next. Naturally, it's Thucydides by the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. This is another big thick one. I've read selections of Thucydides when I took a Greek history class, or an ancient or classical Greek history class. Discussed a lot of, or we read lots of selections of Thucydides. And the great thing about having these two volumes is that I also have, if you see that back shelf over here, at the far end there and at the far end here, I also have the landmark Thucydides and the landmark Herodotus. I have them on polar opposites because they take so much room, but I'll be using those as reference works for looking at their maps and looking at their notes. But I wanted actually these volumes to actually read the text, because the Herodotus, or no, this Thucydides volume in Landmark has just a touched up translation from the 1800s, and the Herodotus volume has a new translation, but the translator has never translated any work into English before, and this translator is Robin Waterfield, and he's an experienced translator, so I wanted a little bit more experienced hand at translating Herodotus. But anyways, I'm looking forward to these. Those are guarantees, and of course, continuing on as soon as I'm done those, these are I'll be going on to, naturally, Plato. Plato will be the next work, the next author. I'll be reading a lot of his works. These are the ones I have in physical copy. This is The Last Days of Socrates, which is a popular short volume of, the Euthyphro, the Apology, Cristo, and Phaedo. And then I have the Republic here. I don't mind that cover. It's a newer penguin. If you can see that spot there, I killed the spider with it. And then I have, what was it, Gorgias? Georgius? Something like that. And then I have this volume of the Great Dialogues of Plato, which includes the Republic, which includes the Symposium, and a couple of others. But I only intend to read the Symposium from this edition. And then one work that I don't have in physical form, which I do plan on still reading, is in my e-reader. It's The Laws. And I guess another word on this translation is by W.H.D. Rouse. And if you recall, I actually read that same translator's version of the Iliad last December, which I quite enjoyed. Next author is naturally Aristotle. I have only 3 of his works in physical form. I have the Nicomachean Ethics. This is a really good volume because half of it is literally just annotation, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, very much so. It goes, like, the actual work itself only goes up to page 170 here. So this is introduction and the actual book by Aristotle, and then this all is annotation and glossary, which I think will be really cool to read. I like Hackett editions. And then this is De Anima, which is on the soul, and this is Poetics. And the rest that are missing here, I'm not reading all of Aristotle or all of Plato, but the other Aristotle that I know that I'm missing is Politics and his book on rhetoric. I plan to read both of those in my e-reader. I have actually quite new translations in my e-reader because they were on sale from University of Chicago Press. Okay, now we enter books that are not guarantees. Well, I think I have one more guarantee. I'll share this one first. And this one, I hope to read this one in August, because Anne Novella and Micah Cummins, 2 booktubers, they're doing Classics and Company throughout 2023, and one of their books that they plan to do starting in August is The Tale of Genji, and I have a copy of The Tale of Genji, and I thought, why not follow along? So in August, I hope to read this monster. And also, if you follow Steve Donahue, you'll recognize that this is one of his favorite books, and this is also the translation that he's blurbed upon. And this book is enormous. It is, over 1,300, just over 1,300 pages. And from what I hear, it's largely plotless, and it's like an ancient Japanese work from, 1,000 years ago, give or take. And I don't know what to expect at all. All I know is that I do have a copy, and what better time to read it than with some other fellow bookish people on BookTube. And now we get on to the books that are not guarantees, but I still hope to read. First, we'll start on some... Do we want to go to this side or this side? I think I'll do this first. But I'm still very much interested in medieval history. I've only read one medieval history book this year. That was in January. It was very good, but I really want to go back. And I'll start off with The Birth of the Middle Ages, 395 to 814 by Mr. Moss. I'm just going to say that because he's got like 14... Okay, he's got like 4 initials there. That's crazy. I'm not going to say all that. It's Mr. Moss or Professor Moss. And as you see, this is a bit battered. Got it used. It's short and it's kind of stiff, so it won't be terribly comfortable to read. And this book is also pretty old. I don't know. It was first published in 1935, and it doesn't look like it's ever been revised since then. So it's almost what, 90 years old already, give or take. But I found it at a used bookstore, and I thought, why not give it a try? The next actually is kind of a textbook. It's Medieval Europe, 1400 to 1500, by H.G. Königsberger. Sounds like a German name. History of Europe, as the subtitle says. It's also a bit short, but it's a lot better made. Got some maps in it as well. Some black and white images. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading some more medieval history. I got, let's see, on that this far shelf over here. I think this is the shelf where I have a ton of medieval history and Renaissance and Reformation era history. But I hope to read my works on medieval history first and then move on in chronological order. So medieval to Renaissance-ish and Reformation. Because there's a few different Renaissance designations, I believe. There's like the Italian Renaissance, and then there's like a later English Renaissance where they include Shakespeare and whatnot in there. But that's for medieval history. This book I might be reading with book club. This is Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. I've actually read this book twice. It's one of my favorite books on politics. It's really short, but it's so poignant, I think. It's really, really insightful, I found. I mean, you will guarantee, like, that provocative title will guarantee that you will disagree with stuff in here. But I just found it so insightful, and it comes from a different perspective than what you would normally think. Usually, because he critiques, in some way, he critiques capitalism here too, but not in the normal, Marxist or communist, neo-communist, whatever way that people critique capitalism. He comes from a conservative Catholic post-liberal is what he calls himself, perspective, where he's a lot more traditional and communitarian oriented, but not. So I find it really fascinating, and it sounds like one of my book groups is really interested in reading this, so I hope to read it with them. And next is a bit of a guilty omission. This is Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. I've had this book on my shelf forever, yet I've just never got to it. And I love Chesterton, even though I've read a number of his essays and whatnot. He's just a fantastic writer, and I'm not a big fan of his fiction, but for nonfiction, he's just fantastic, and this one, I expect that it'll be really good, because I've read a little bit from here, just selections, and even looking at the chapter titles, it just sounds so G.K. Chesterton-like, that I can't imagine that it would be anything else, but like, look at this. The introduction is titled In Defense of Everything Else. Then the next chapter, chapter 2, is The Maniac. Chapter 3, The Suicide of Thought. Chapter 4, The Ethics of Elfland. And it goes on from there, but, like, those are great chapter titles. I hope he... And this is short, too. Like, this is, what, not even 200 pages. So I should be able to read this book and enjoy it. But yet it just continues to sit on my TBR, and I pass over it to read other things. I think I'm gonna go the textbook route. One thing that I really enjoy about used bookstores is that when I go used bookstore shopping in the city, I don't live in the city, but there's a city about an hour and 20 minutes away from here, and sometimes I go there and just go to a bunch of used bookstores and buy really cheap books, and come back with a tub full of used books from multiple used bookstores. And one great thing about that is that there is a university, there's a university, there's a big university, and then a few smaller universities and colleges. And the great thing about that is that people discard their used textbooks, and you can buy them for cheap. And that's the case here, where I love to pick up those used textbooks for really cheap, and put them on my TBR and give them a try. And one of them is that I hope to read is Politics, and the subtitle is An Introduction to the Modern Democratic State by Larry Johnston. And this is literally what it says. It's just a book on politics. What it is, how to define it, what all fits underneath that definition. So it's like the study of politics. So chapter 1 is the study of politics and its objects. Then chapter 2 is methods and approaches. The emergency of liberal democracy, philosophy, ideology, and it just goes on from there. And that may sound incredibly tedious to you, and yet at the same time, that sounds incredibly interesting to me, because that's our world. Like this is our world, regardless of whether you keep track of politics or not. This is our world, and this, I believe, will situate me a lot better in our current political era, I guess. Even though this is a little bit older, and this is what, from 2007-ish? 2007-ish, so of course it'll be a little bit outdated, but I don't care. I really want to eat this thing up. It's exciting to me to read about politics, and not only because it situates me in my current, or just before current, because it's from 2007, and that will help me in my Western Canon reading list to read how those ideas progressed along to where I am at now, and I think that'll be a useful understanding. And another textbook is A History of the Canadian Peoples by J.M. Bumstead. Another textbook, this time a history textbook, and this one excites me because even though I did take a lot of history classes in university, I never took any Canadian history classes, and I think this will be a really helpful primer on getting me up to speed, because the last time I understood any history or Canadian history was in high school, and that's been a while. So having this book will really situate me in my own history, because I am Canadian, and even though this is also relatively old, at least in my terms, but from 2003. But not much has really happened in the last 20 years that will make this significantly outdated, I don't think. We have 3 more books, and these are all novels. These are also strongly maybes. They could stay on my TBR for another year, or I could read them next month. Well, I have no clue. But they've all been on my TBR for quite a while. The first one is The Mill and the Floss by George Eliot. George Eliot is one of the few Victorian authors, or big-name Victorian authors, that I have not read anything by, and I think that's scandalous. I really need to read some George Eliot. And this is the one that really pulls at me the most. I mean, I do have a copy of Middlemarch. I have a copy of, Felix Holt. I have a copy of Silas Marner. You'd think Silas Marner would be the one that I choose, because that's like 200 pages. But no, this one really pulls at me for some reason. And it's weird, because I don't even like these Wordsworth editions, because they're kind of stiff, and they got really small print. And this one is, over 500 pages? Or almost? Not quite. 468 pages. And the cover is kind of boring. But yet, nonetheless, the premise of this book it pulls at me. So I'd like it to be my introduction to George Eliot. The next book will be sort of familiar. I think I've showed this in a video before. This is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. This is just a monstrous, what, 1,300 pages as well? No, not quite. It's 1,200, over 1,200 pages. And it's just this big fat adventure novel that almost everyone seems to enjoy. And I really want to join in on that adventure because people who read this usually want it to be longer, even though it's quite long. And people who say that are people who don't normally read and enjoy long works. So I really think this would be a lot of fun to read. And this book has been on my TBR for probably 2 years in a row, just sitting on my TBR. And every summer I choose it as one of the few chunksters that I hope to read that year, because every summer I like to read at least a couple of chunksters, because I just love big fat books like this. And this one I always pass over it. Like, I think last year I chose Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur, his book on King Arthur. And I chose that one and another book that slips my mind, but I chose those two other big fat books over. Oh, the second one was Lord of the Rings. I chose them over this, and I think it's about time that I get to this. But will it be this year? And the last book is another novel. This one's a lot more recent and more controversial. It's The Kindly Ones by Jonathan Littell. And this book, it's another big fat book. This one's probably under 1,000 pages, but it's a nice big hardcover. And this one has not been on my TBR as long, but the whole premise of it and the tone of the opening pages, which I've looked at, I read the first few pages just to get a feel of what this book might be about. And both the subject matter and the tone really pull at me as well, because it's written from the perspective of someone who's pro-Nazi in the Nazi regime while everything is happening, and he's writing his memoirs about why he did what he did. And so you can imagine he's quite a monster, and there's a lot of atrocities in these 1,000 pages. But for some reason, that premise, like the very opening, I think I should read that to you, just to read the first few lines to get you why it pulls at me, because it's written from his perspective of him writing down and justifying his reasons for being part of the Nazi regime. He says, "Oh, my human brothers, let me tell you how it happened. I am not your brother," you'll retort, "and I don't want to know. But it certainly is true that this is a bleak story, but an edifying one, a real morality play, I assure you. You might find it a bit long. A lot of things happened, after all. But perhaps you're not in too much of a hurry. With a little luck, you'll have some time to spare." And it just goes on from there, trying to just pulling you in and hooking you with that premise. And then, of course, the fictional character witnesses all the major atrocities that happened in Nazi Germany, and he describes it in this book. And so it'll be a gruesome and brutal read, but something I'm really looking forward to, in the sense that I'm fascinated by it, and I guess prepared to be startled and grossed out and revolted. Yet, from what I understand, he's quite a literary person, so he quotes from classical authors and whatnot. And it really is a fascinating portrait of evil in that sense. And I guess that's what interests me about it, about what evil is, and how just anyone, almost, it seems like, can be pulled into that influence. But I guess that's all I have today, and thanks a lot, BookTube.